Can't hear.
Roy, we cannot hear you. Hold on, everyone. This is a real-time QA going on. All right, Roy, do you want me to kick it off while you find your audio? Okay. Welcome everyone who's joining us. Today is meant to be a no holds barred conversation on the future of work. We said no predictions because really none of us know what is going to happen, but you have a group of incredible investors here who think a lot about all the different components of future of work. And why don't we kind of kick it off by just going around, starting Lon, Jason, Naomi, me, and then Roy. Hopefully he'll be live. Who are you? Where do you work? And maybe a quick background on what you invest in.
You have entered the meeting as a panelist. Attendees can now hear you speak. This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, I'm Lon. I run a fund called Basis Ventures. We're early stage fund, $140 million investing in future of work and AI. Specifically, we focus on automation of the office work and anything in and outside office, including farms, factory, logistics, supply chain, construction, you name it.
Hey everyone, my name is Jason Corsello. I am the general partner at a fund called Acadian Ventures. Acadian is a relatively new fund, $20 million seed fund focused on exclusively the future of work. Our definition of future work is really looking at software-based companies looking to transform work to make it more pleasant, more productive, really with focus on a few categories: people, pay, productivity, and progression. I'm a little disappointed, Kara, that we're not doing predictions because I rely on you for all of my predictions, but look forward to some fun chat today.
Great.
Naomi,
everybody.
Go for it.
Naomi, Ionita, I'm a partner at Menlo Ventures. We've been around for over 40 years, multi-stage, multi-sector fund, invest in game-changing ideas that reinvent life and work. I lead a lot of our early stage SaaS investing, focus heavily on future of work, workflow automation, low code, no code, productivity, a lot of the themes we're hearing about today, especially in a post-COVID world. And but as a firm, we cover broad focus areas across healthcare and SaaS and consumer brands you've heard of like Uber, Roku, Chime, Carta. So very broad thesis area here.
I've never heard of Uber, Naomi. What do they do? Sorry, just kidding. We got to have a little humor on Zoom. I'm Kara Nortman. I'm a partner at Upfront Ventures. We've been around for about 25 years where we invest out of a Series A fund and an early growth fund, heavily in, sorry, Siri has launched itself. We're getting all the QA going here. So across sectors as well. So consumer, enterprise, SaaS, as well as some frontier tech areas like applied biology and ag tech. I personally spend quite a bit of time focused on workforce training, ed tech, security, elements of automation applied to industries, which are some of the things we're going to talk about here today. And as a firm, we've invested in everything from Bird to the Wing, Appeal, Ring, a bunch of companies that you guys may have heard of as well.
All right, is my audio working now? Hallelujah. Okay. Well, we are seeing live kinks getting worked out. I'm Roy Bahat from Bloomberg Beta, and we are a seed and pre-seed fund that has invested only in the future of work since we were started almost 10 years ago now. And we think of the future of work as including lots of different categories, basically anything that can make business work better, including how folks like us do our work, but also other industries like logistics. So we invested in Flexport, or security, Cobalt Robotics, or insurance, even Newfront Insurance. So that's how we think of it. And this conversation came about, I'll do like a tiny bit of housekeeping now that I've got the floor, and then we'll just jump right in. This conversation came about because of a Twitter thread that a few of us were on, and we said, hey, wouldn't it'd be great for all of us to talk and compare notes and try to figure out what's going on. And we figured that as long as we're doing that, we might as well make it open to now more than 200 of you who are listening in. And so if you want to participate, we are going to pay attention to the Q&A panel. And so if you can ask your questions in that Q&A panel, unlike a normal panel conversation where we all have a conversation amongst ourselves and assume it is interesting to you and then turn to you, you can put questions in the flow as we get going, whether it's a reaction to something or some topic area you think is really important that you want us to cover. And then feel free to also upvote other people's questions, because then we'll know what folks are interested in, and we will try to pay attention to it. We're also trying this as a moderator-free forum, so no predictions and no moderator. We'll all behave and talk amongst ourselves, and I think that's it. As far as background context goes, we can just jump right in. And we had so many different topics we wanted to hit that we're going to try to do them justice while knowing we can't cover everything. Let's just start with the very basic, which is going around quickly. And when this phrase, the future of work, has now been used in so many different contexts that I don't think we quite know what it means anymore, and would love for each person to just share what it means to them. And so the way we'll do this is I'll kick it to one person, you kick it to the next until we cover everybody. So Lon, why don't you start?
Yeah.
What is the future of work?
The future of work to us means it's pretty broad. Basically, how do we work in the future? For us, it means enterprise focus, anything from the very basic automation to very kind of advanced machine learning. So on that spectrum, any kind of up and down the stack from infrastructure to the application layer, we're all investing. So like our definition is fairly broad. And I'll kick it to Jason.
Yeah, Alan, I mean, I've got more of a utopian definition, but as a fund, we're much more specialized around SaaS, around software. We don't look at areas like robotics or logistics, but my utopian definition is transforming work and leveraging technology to make people's work lives simpler, more pleasant, and ultimately more productive. Now, sounds great, but fundamentally, I think I used to say 10 years, now I say the next 5 years is going to be more different than the last 50 years. And I think that's at the core of it. So, as a fund, we look at software as that definition or transforming component, but certainly love everyone else's perspective as well. Kara, go for it.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I used to say future work is kind of the future of everything. So it's a little bit of a cop out. And one of the things that got this going was everyone's now an expert on the future of work. So we do want to hear from you guys as well. But there's kind of three core areas that I personally focus on. One is training, reskilling training, whether that's, higher ed, K through 12, or in the workforce. So I've focused a bit more in the workforce historically. Second area is automation, but probably in a way that applies more to industry, and sort of, what are you automating so human beings can do more of X? And then the third area I personally spend a lot of time looking at is security, which may not fall into everyone's definition, but in a world where you're using, data to educate people online, automate things, et cetera, it becomes really important to understand where that sits, how you control it, and make sure it's safe and secure to allow any of this future of work stuff to happen. So those are the three broad categories I personally focus on. And I am going to kick it over to Naomi.
Great. We agree. I mean, this is broad, and everyone touched on a lot of themes in the way, we think about it as well. It's all about how work gets done. So that's the core infrastructure layer. That's the workflows that people need just to be more productive. I'm personally a bit of an efficiency sort of productivity nerd. I was sort of early days at Evernote, and so it's been kind of baked in me from 10 years back almost. And so I like automation. I like efficiency. And so how do we automate away the mundane and repetitive parts of people's jobs so they can focus on higher order problems? They can focus on proprietary value for the company. So I come at it from a kind of SaaS software standpoint, but as a firm, we touch robotics, we touch a lot of the frontier technologies to bring efficiency to folks in all different sectors.
All right, so then I'll do ours, which is, I think of it in two categories. One is the work stack, so things that make the way we function better. That could be data infrastructure or a new application or a productivity tool or even media that we use in a working context. And then the other is companies that embody some new way of working so deeply that, you know, from a business model perspective, they might just be the next company in their industry. Sometimes we call it a full stack, you know, company, of course. And, but their way of working is so profoundly different that that's the reason for what drives value in them. And, you know, one of the things that we all were talking about that I'd love to reflect on for a second is how, especially in Silicon Valley, when we say the future of work, we oftentimes tend to imply work like our work, you know, information work or office work, and let alone the particular culture of technology companies. And the way this crisis has landed has been so different for so many different segments of the economy, for so many occupations, and would love to just hear reflections on how you are seeing all of this land differently across the different sectors in which you're involved.
Well, and I think you should kick us off.
Sure. So as an investor, we're pretty broad in terms of like maybe 50% time spent on productivity tools. I used to work at Dropbox and look at a lot of like automation tools within the office. Another 50% time we actually spend on some of the, what we call kind of the real economy, workers who are mainly deskless workers, which actually majority of our economy. So there are some really interesting trends I've been seeing, you know, from both like kind of in and outside office that, you know, changing the way we work. Like, for example, I'll give a couple examples. One, logistics supply chain has been completely being revamped in the past couple of months. I personally talked to like 30, 40 factories myself with like, you know, securing PPE and along that lines. Also like everything going direct, you know, farms, chefs. So the supply chain will, is already changing. The future of supply chain will look fundamentally different from the supply chain today. You know, and we're seeing that happening. The other example is labor shortage. Labor shortage has been going on for a very, very long time. Now, COVID just exacerbated the problem of labor shortage, which is particularly serious in farms, you know, in factories, and a lot of these different spaces that just don't have enough labor, right? For example, like welding as an industry, average age of a welder is 55 years old. Now with COVID, it's going to be a little bit even harder to find people to work in this industry. So I think the impact for future work on certain verticals outside of our you know, home offices, you know, professionals, desk workers is actually you know, more than it's impacting us in a way that's just like a make or break certain verticals industry.
Let me layer on here as well. I like the way that Roy framed it in terms of the stack. The way I think about the stack is you've got the worker, the work, and the work infrastructure. Something that I'm fascinated with that layers across all of that is skills development. I think this plays into what Kara said, which is because of all the things that are happening in the economy today in work, we've got, you know, massive unemployment that's happened in such a fast period of time. Skills development is so important. And that means everything from training for new skills that maybe we didn't necessarily have before, training for skills that are more important than ever, like creativity, like problem solving, being able to train new skills that we're going to need within our organization, right? I mean, companies are going to have to redeploy workers across the board. How do we reskill them in a fast, productive way? I also think about, you know, the future work. A concept is, you know, a lot of companies need to think about themselves as skills factories, right? How do we think about building up skills, because we're going to have positions that in 1 year or 2 years that didn't necessarily exist, right? If you look at positions that are on Amazon's career site or others, there's positions there that weren't even there 6 months ago. So I think about future work, and one of the biggest themes for me right now is around skills development and building out those skills inventories. And I think there's so many ways to do it, but it's more important than ever right now.
Yeah, so let me ask Naomi something about that. We had a question on sort of, do we include education technology, and Jason, you implied skills in here. I think we would all nod along and say, by whatever definition we have, it's one of those important areas. There's this view that that if you use the right tools, you don't need skilling in quite the same way, because if Evernote is designed correctly, or whatever tool you've worked on or invested in is designed correctly, the tool carries its own learning with it. And I think this mostly applies to information industry. I don't think you can learn to use a welder, to be a welder by using a torch, like just by having the right torch in your hand. But Naomi, would love to hear your thoughts on the divide between what we expect the software to do for us versus what we think that the person needs to go out and try to learn.
It's a good question. There's this big overarching theme right now a lot of people are hearing about with the low code, no code movement. And so I think about it in a few different ways. I think about going back to automation and efficiency. There's the low code is, how do you just have engineers get leverage on their own time so they can focus on other problems for the business. But then there's this no code kind of realm that's speaking to the business user. And so these are on-ramps for someone who might be an analyst, might be a product manager, might be a marketer, who now is superhuman. They can do things and be self-sufficient at work without needing to, find an engineer to write a line of code for them. And now, being in a distributed workforce, like more than ever, we need people to be more self-sufficient. We need people to be more productive. We need people to be able to lean on these rails of products that can help them do their jobs and have access to more just self-sufficient kind of workflows and getting things done.
So can I push you on that and ask others about their perspective too? One of the mysteries, I think, in startup tech is we have this belief that, you hand a person the right tools, they become much more effective and productive. And we see it in our own work. But then as, and I know some of you have been on these trips, as we've gone around the country on these comeback cities tours to go visit with VCs, other places where the startup ecosystems are more nascent, you don't see that behavior in as prevalent a way as you do in Silicon Valley or New York or some heart of the tech ecosystem. And I'm just curious, what do you guys think is behind that puzzle? That we should all be superheroes, yet it seems like the economic activity is still concentrated, at least pre-COVID, and we'll see how that, we can see how that, I think one of the big questions at hand is, will COVID change that? But what's behind that puzzle of why it all still seems to be concentrated on the coasts?
I think there's a lot around just comfort levels with technology and what the sort of expectation has been around you, kind of within your home environment, within your work environment. If you're in an old school industry, if things are very pen and paper driven, it's hard to really push these tools out and get that adoption across an organization. If you're in, early days Slack pushing out to companies in Silicon Valley, it was small teams using it and spreading like wildfire. And it was started with companies that were very quick to adopt and teams that are very quick to adopt new tools. And so it's just, what's that friction layer and what's the kind of willingness to adopt new technologies to do work versus kind of the old way.
Yeah, I think math is, sorry, like the time saved by using these new tools versus the time people need to spend on onboarding. When I was Dropbox is an insanely easy to use tool. Most people can figure out and just install and start using this. But for certain segments of people, like if I'm trying to teach my mom to use Dropbox, it take her a ton of time to even just install Dropbox and try and understand what that is. That like learning curve is very, very common for a certain group of users. Superhuman, another example, you have to learn the shortcuts to be able to truly feel the difference, but like that's kind of learning curve. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've seen on that, and it's always hard for me to tell when I'm interrupting. So if I'm doing it extra here, you can just like make a gun sound or something and I'll duck. There you go. Carrie, you're next. We assume tools are easy to use in tech, and I think there's a skill of learning to adopt new tools. And while the whole world has been looking at this COVID moment and saying, work from home, have some for certain occupations, there's something, to that. I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing happening right now is a bunch of office-based people who had not ever had much impetus to try new tools, things that might feel commonplace in Silicon Valley, but like in a typical job, you might install one new piece of software, one new login a year, something like that. I think now all of a sudden they're trying 20 new things and getting in the settings and figuring out how it works. And so my guess is that we're seeing people just familiarizing themselves with much more software right now than they were before. All right, Kara, I ducked from your bullet. Now, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
God, I usually don't have a hard time interrupting people. This is a whole new mental health challenge for me. But
You can mute me.
I'm kidding. I think it's really important to make a distinction between skills and tools. And the tools kind of bring out the skills, but we have a massive skilling and reskilling issue. And we know all the stats in education, the debt, the incompletion rates, all of these sort of things. But I think if you think about the misalignment between what we're learning and how that lines up with skills, and then Silicon Valley has been overly obsessed with turning the accountant into the coder, which is not a bad thing. Like, coding is an important skill set and place to spend time. But, I think more importantly is sort of to look at, one, the K through 12 experience, two, the higher ed experience, and then specifically, how do we do more collaborations between the workplace, whether it's gig workers and field workers or knowledge workers, and the actual like industries and that will show job growth. So how do we train healthcare professionals? How do we train security professionals, security analysts? None of these things technically require a certification or a degree. And so one of the major things I've looked at are sort of how do you move from like training people for skills in these multi-year approaches to smaller bits of content, and getting them to put them into action. So, iterate on putting them to work. And I think a lot of this will happen within workplaces, whether it's, companies like Strive, which does it, kind of helps people learn to basic knowledge worker skills, how to negotiate, how to manage people, how to run meetings, or it's companies that are training, nurses and physician assistants and getting them in the field and back and forth. So I think we in Silicon Valley confuse skills and tools, and we need to figure out how our tools drive skills and do it in the places and spaces where people have the time and money to do it and line it up with the pocketbook in the right way.
Kara, where I started to hear you going was describing some kinds of skills that you'd like to see. And I thought maybe what I heard there, one thing that requires no predicting at all is what are the companies that address those problems that you wish landed in your inboxes right now? Those learning problems around, and somebody asked, I think David Pickrell asked in the Q&A about what this will look like, what work will look like generally for gig workers, hourly workers. I'd love to hear this piece of how do you learn how to do those jobs, because many people are now in a place where they got to figure out what the next source of income is, and would just love to hear startups you would like to fund that might take that on, or if you think that's the wrong way to think about it, push back.
I'm happy to jump in since we're on kind of like the training ed side, and then kick it over to somebody else. But I would love to see, so one, I do think we have to keep asking ourselves, where do these things get built and funded? Is it a startup? Is it venture backed? Is it private equity backed? Is it civically backed? Is it some sort of hybrid model and not assume the model? And I think if we think about it, many different types of ways of funding these things will just get more innovation across the board, and it's a beautiful time for that. But I personally would love to see, what I guess I would call the Shopify of training. And I've started to see this with higher ed, where you have the new learning management systems, and there's a couple of them that are doing less content and quizzing and more breakout rooms, setting colleges and universities up to build their curriculums in different ways and get people engaging online and offline in more of a hybrid model. But I think there's lower end, there should be some platform to get individual teachers and educators just up and running and testing and experimenting the way Shopify did for individual shop owners. So I think that's one area. I think more collaboration with the workforce, more like how do you not go through higher ed, but go directly from high school into into the GE management training program of the future, but for nursing, for security analysts, for business skills, so things of that nature. So those are some of the things, and then learning is fun. I think more things where we don't know if we're learning, browser plugins, I'm learning Spanish on the fly, I'm going down a rabbit hole of interest in understanding, something about, I don't know, healthcare that makes me realize actually I want to be a nurse, even though I've associated that as a female profession because we don't call it a medical attendant and I'm a guy. So I think kind of more things that help people really understand what they might want to be in a lower cost way where they can just sort of explore them. Those are 3 areas that are, are interesting to me in the pure kind of training world. And I'll kick it over to Jason. Jason used to work at Cornerstone on Demand and spent a lot of time looking at, kind of a bunch of trends from a big company perspective. So I'd be interested, Jason, to hear about what you were thinking about then and what you are thinking about differently now that you're as a VC, what you'd like to see exist in the world.
Kara, yeah, it's interesting. I think about it from the operator's perspective, and probably more specifically from the business perspective. When I think about skills, I think about 2 things. One is for the individual person, how do they upskill or reskill, and how do you make that easy for them, right? I don't necessarily care that someone completed a data science course on Coursera or Udemy, right? What I care is they applied that skill in some form or fashion, and that allowed them to progress. So there's the what's in it for me as an individual, right? I took a course, it gave me the skill. Now I can go and become a development manager or a CIO or a CTO. Conversely, for the organization, we have the biggest challenge within organizations today is we don't know what skills we have. We don't have a skills inventory, right? Back in my consulting days, we used to go to companies and say, LinkedIn knows more about your employees than you do, right? And the fact of the matter is that I used to say that 15 years ago. I still think that's the case today, right? So how do we assess what skills that we have, what skills that are missing today, and what skills that we need in the future? This isn't the tools problem, right? We have plenty of tools. We have the technology that's there. It's really in how we apply them and leverage the technology. I'll say one last thing, and I'll pass it over to Naomi here. To answer your question, Roy, on companies, we just funded a company called Mighty Labs. And their whole idea is to solve this whole talent management issue, but do it in a very, very different way, which is I have a project. I want to assemble a project team that pulls together the best skills within the organization. These aren't skills because I have a credential that says I passed this course. It's based off of what my peers have said. And then after that project's done, I want to be able to go and rate my employees. Hey, Naomi was awesome at X, or Kara was fantastic at Y. And so instead of having this kind of artificial skills inventory, you have it based off of real work, real life experiences. And so that's where I'm starting to focus my energy, is not necessarily on the technology for technology's sake, but how does it apply within the enterprise? Naomi, what do you think?
I think that's a great segue. I've been thinking about this problem too from kind of a people operations standpoint. What are the platforms, kind of data layers that companies can have access to understand the talent in front of them? All these companies are going through major rifts and they need to do more with less. And so there's a company I'm close with called Flux, and they do that data layer of understanding who at an organization can actually complete certain tasks. What do we know about them based on what they've done in the company or prior? Pretty powerful to be able to align employees with that work and the evolving needs of a company. And they're standing up these project marketplaces for companies so that now people with extra capacity or people that just want to continue to show their value in the workplace can pick up new projects, keep moving the company forward. And it's an upskilling opportunity. And what a driver of retention when people get to keep being fulfilled and learn on the job.
Can I ask both of you on that? And maybe Lon, we'll get yours in a second, but just that feels like a pre-COVID way of looking at the world to me. I mean, I spoke to 2 MIT economists, Andy McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson, who their conclusion from exactly that same line of thinking that you were describing is the companies are about to fire all the wrong people because they just don't know who they should be holding on to. And maybe we should have done these analyses 2 or 3 years ago, but like it's game time now. Like we're all in it. And I wonder how you see that operators, I mean, you're both past operators, how you see that operator's perspective and like, okay, that's fine. But now like we're dealing with the situation on the ground. Does it change the picture? Or is it more like, well, we need to wait till we get back to a more normal setup? Maybe I'm overreacting to COVID, but I'm curious the post-COVID lens on what you said.
No, it's playing out in real time. I mean, every time companies do hiring freezes, Flux sees an increase in engagement. Because what happens is internal employees are saying, I want to raise my hand. I want to learn a new skill. I want to help the company. I want to show my value. I want to move the company forward. And so they actually see a surge in engagement of people raising their hand. It's sort of real data to back that, but I don't think it's a pre-COVID thing. I think it's a how do we do more with less? It's a resource optimization game.
Right.
Yeah,
It's more with
Roy,
less for sure helps with that.
Yeah, Roy, I was gonna say it's a bit. You have to do a bit of both right now, right? You got to triage right now, right? And unfortunately, you got to triage with probably a lot of data that's not completely accurate. Combined with you have to look to the future. I mean, I've been hearing this term, the big reset, right now, and I think this is such a huge opportunity, whether you're sitting in a CHRO seat or somewhere else, to look at every single process that you have in your organization and say, how should I be doing it differently, right? Because a lot of them are just flawed. They haven't evolved in many years. You know, I sit and watch CNBC in background, and Domino's came out with their earnings report last week, and they basically said they rewrote.
You know, you're going to start watching Bloomberg in the background, but that's cool. Keep going.
I'm sorry. Oh my God. Sorry to offend you, Roy. But you know, they said on Bloomberg that you know, they rewrote 60 years of operating procedures in 6 weeks, right? I mean, every company should be doing that right now. Every company should be looking at, like, how can we rewire our company? Yes, you gotta deal with facts on the ground right now, but you have to rewire your company in the future. Why not do it right now? Like, this is such an amazing opportunity to be able to do that. Kara's smirking over there. She wants to weigh in.
No, well, I'm thinking two things. One is it's such a broad topic that we could spend the entire time talking factories or retail or knowledge workers. And I think we're all kind of feeling like we want to hit on all of it. So just an acknowledgement to that. But the reason I'm smirking is I was thinking about somebody telling me that employees at Goldman Sachs are now allowed to click on DocSends. And that's been and I don't know, it might have been a different bank, but I think it was Goldman. But that's been, you know, the like hotly debated topics of, like, you know, move to the, just, you know, click on links that and move things to the cloud that overnight are moving to the cloud. That you know, where you're seeing that overnight. I just think it's fascinating. I've heard, you know, just from the security side of the companies and people I speak to that, you know, the CISOs everywhere are dealing with 10, 20, 30% of their workforce working from home at a time to 100%, right? And so it's immediately moved to, don't move through an RFP process. Do we, like, oh my gosh, our VPN, buying up VPN equipment, all the way to now certain digital transformation projects accelerating. But I hear a lot of really mixed things on the digital transformation side. I think there's the low-hanging fruit stuff where you get people up and working and productive. And then there's going to be like a question as to what gets moved along and how much of that is accruing to all the incumbent vendors like Oracle and Microsoft, et cetera, versus kind of the new wave of vendors who are trying to get in there and help out. But I do think there are certain areas like the DocSend link, or just, you know, 70 million kids moving on, doing online education for the first time, that should dramatically accelerate and change certain areas. But others, I think are going to move ahead much faster than they are. And the big vendors are going to kind of still continue to capture share. But that's, I guess I made a prediction. There's a prediction. Sorry.
You're muted, Roy.
We lost Roy again.
You're muted.
Somehow I got muted. As it goes, I was just going to say, Lon, I think it's your turn. Want to hear from you on what you want to see landing in your inbox, and your thoughts on some of this learning across different industries.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First and foremost, I think I want my kids out of the house. You know, talking about like people adopting the trend, adopting to online education. I cannot wait for them to go to school. I think this is the one area that would, like, it's
Take your action to work from home. I want to go back to the office. Sorry, keep going.
The one thing was like kind of opposite. My kids are young. They're, you know, 4 and 2 years old. I think older is a different story. But I think two things I would love to see. One is I agree with Jason. This is like complete reset for certain vertical, certain industries. For supply chain logistics, for example, like in this, you know, companies have been wiped out completely. So there's going to be new vendors coming in, completely reimagine, connect the supply and connect the demand directly without many middlemen, which I think would be like a super opportunity for workflow automation, for you know, getting people cheaper and better products in hand. I think this is probably has never been a better time to democratize access of certain industries. And personally, I'm excited about that, and I actually see that happening in real time. On the other hand, with some high-skilled labor industries,
Sorry, can I just stop you, Lon, before you get to the high-skilled industries? What are the opportunities that you're seeing there in real time? Because it seems like one of the big questions for the whole economy right now is we have all these people who just got knocked on their asses. And they're sitting and looking online and seeing messages, sometimes from folks like us in Silicon Valley, saying things like, well, if you just seize your future in your hands and learn how to start your Shopify store or launch a blank, you'll be fine. And so I'm curious what you see folks actually, because I think that feels to me like one of the big unsolved problems. We took all these people and we said, your work is essential. By the way, half of you are now out of work, or however many. And what learning do you actually see happening in real time?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, the most obvious ones, if you look at the job boards that companies still hiring, you have like Instacart, like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Ally, Universal, Walmart, all these companies are hiring insane amount of workers, and like hospitals, healthcare workers, and a lot of these are mostly hourly based kind of jobs, and relatively kind of low skill. If you want to become a Instacart delivery person, it's relatively easy for you to just switch and do that right away. So that I think that's more on the kind of obvious side. And then some of the less obvious side, and as I talked about supply chain logistics, is actually quite interesting. Coincidentally, I've been talking to 30, 40 factories the past couple of months. I think because I speak Chinese, I really have no medical knowledge, no credential whatsoever to even touch medical supply. But as it turns out, none of the existing distributors in the country have any supply. So hospitals or workers who need PPE need to either go look outside to import these supplies from China, from other countries, which is just a whole new space, or domestic factories would reposition themselves and start producing these products, right? To me, that's such an interesting problem, because either has existed before. So workers were either you're probably making, I don't know, shoes. Now all of a sudden you're producing masks, and then your inventory and then your price kind of income will be way up. Or if you're a supplier of masks outside of the country and you never have been in this business, now you're all of a sudden importing masks to the United States in huge quantity. So I think those are more of the less obvious and a little bit harder to get into space, but I'm seeing this happening in certain verticals, like construction, for example. We talk about factory, talk about farming. We're seeing a lot of the wholesalers now selling direct to customers, right? So, that's just has never happened before.
Okay, Roy, I'm jumping in. I'm going to take one. So we have some amazing stuff coming through Q&A. I'm going to take one from Stacy Breen. Breeny, thanks for tuning in. Stacy Breen's a doctor, and she was putting in a question about really a lot of health, and I've heard this from a lot of healthcare professionals, that healthcare professionals are able to do a large percentage of what they were doing in person via telemedicine, and it's reimbursable, at least for the moment. And so there was a question around more collaboration. As a healthcare worker, how do you bring in social work, mental health, other things, the human element, the stuff that won't be automated in chart reading? And I think this is applicable across online education, work in general. Any of you guys seeing examples or interested in, companies that are doing kind of moving out of their industry vertical, like I automate law or medicine or specific tasks into more of a collaborative approach to not knowledge working, but industry problems? I'm just curious.
I'll give you a very, Kara, I'll give you a very kind of probably a lame generic example, but one of our companies that we just funded is a company called Naomi Health. They've been in the media the last week. Pre-product, pre-revenue company. I've known the founder for 10 years, but they saw this challenge of testing in Utah. They couldn't get tests in Utah. They work with Governor Romney to start to bring tests into Utah. So they use it, this whole idea of, can we build a site that brings together a lot of smart people? So they partnered up with Domo, they partnered up with Qualtrics to essentially bring awareness with the government to bring more tests into Utah. Last week, they signed a $26 million contract to accelerate testing, not in just into Utah, but other states like Iowa, I think Nebraska are also participating now. So this is a company that didn't have a product. They, their mission was more to solve the healthcare billing problem, but they've pivoted in a week to help solve a short-term problem around acceleration of testing. Somehow Ashton Kutcher got involved, which is a fascinating story in itself. But I don't know if that answers your question, but it's an example of a company that has brought together a lot of smart people in a short period of time in a smaller network community in Salt Lake City, and said, hey, someone's not doing this for this, the government is not doing this for us, let's partner up to figure out how we can do it for our local community. That's one example. I don't know if that's a good one, but I thought I'd share it.
No, I think that's great. And I think that's probably an area that's ill-defined in all of our heads right now, but I think is sort of a very interesting area for innovation, which is like our brains tend to think in, industries or functions, and it's maybe a time for different experts in different fields to come together to try to solve a problem. Healthcare is a really obvious one, but there may be something around hourly workers or around mental health where, and this may lead into our next question, where the home and the workplace used to be these distinct things. And so, and your mental health, if it was a workplace, if it was a true mental health topic, you would go to a mental health professional. But if it was a work topic, you might go to an executive coach, right? But now our worlds are blending together. And so this goes to a question that's gotten a lot of upvotes from many of us on this panel. A friend of ours, a woman named Emily Keaton, shout out to Emily out there somewhere in Texas. I'm just gonna read the question. What does it mean for the sharing economy and density? What does this all mean? So is the future of work now becoming the future of home? And what does it mean? What does that mean for our spaces, for interacting with our kids, for how we set up work to move between home and office? And do we even have offices anymore? Was WeWork on the right path? So anyway, I'll kick that over, but I think the sense of like home and work coming together and how that changes, kind of, our investment themes or companies that we're addressing this topic well.
I think that, so this is a big one, and it touches, Karen, what you said before around the future of work is the future of everything, because it always was. And, as a guy, I can confidently say that I knew that less than every single woman in my life. And as people who have, occupations where we're sitting in a position of relative privilege, I think we're just now like the bullshit has been called on the separation between work problems and home problems, and now they're all of our problems. And I think that could be a good thing. Min, who's on the Bloomberg beta team, jumped in, I think, and asked the first question here around the problems that will persist. And I think it's tied together in the sense that unless we can understand or across class, gender, race, and other forms of difference, the ways that this lands so differently on people, we're not going to have an easy way out of this. So if those differences continue to cloud our judgment about what makes sense, like we're going to be blind to lots of solutions. And look, I'll just say we're fans of the solutions that serve the office-based professional too. We invest in a company called StrongSuit, whose entire business is, hey, you know how your EA in yesteryear used to like remember your kid's birthday and buy something or make that reservation? Well, now that's not accepted in the workplace, so we all like secretly go do it. Well, they do it as a service, but that's only going to work for a big segment, but only one segment. So I think this whole thing is, yes, it's the future of work and home, and understanding how it falls differently on different people across the country and the world is the whole game right now.
Yeah, I think the silver lining coming out of this is I think people are going to have more empathy towards people who have to go through this. And as a working mother of two kids under 5, and and also running my own fund, my working life has been always integrated. I just feel like for the first time, I'm seeing the empathy from a lot of people. Actually, this is hard, and I've actually my husband and I are getting closer to 50-50 more so than ever. I know like a lot of households are having the opposite issues, but like for us at least, we're getting close to 50-50. We just cannot even leave home. So for us, the big difference is not technology, not tool driven. It's more like from the human empathy side. culture. Yeah, that's a big fundamental change that's at least happening to my like individual household right now.
Yeah, it just reminds me as you say that, we did this project with New America a few years ago to try to anticipate scenarios for the future of work, a commission for the Shift Commission. And we started out with this video that was made, I think, by IBM. It was made, I don't know, 40 years ago, predicting the future of work. And it was amazing how they nailed everything about the technology. It was like email, shopping, and managing your finances at home. But everything about how society changed, they totally missed. Like the husband would approve the purchases that his wife made on her like electronic console at home. And so I think that blindness to this is such a big deal. And then I'll shut up in 10 seconds. I'll just say the other factor that we've been missing that we need to pay attention to is aging. This is going to fall so differently on older populations. And when people ask me like, what's going to change in the future of work? And then they start talking about Slack. Yeah, we're modest investors in Slack. We love Slack. The single biggest change you can all guarantee will happen is it's going to get a lot older, and none of us knows how to think about that yet.
Hey, Roy, let me weigh in here and be a contrarian on remote work, right? Because, you know, that has been the hype in Silicon Valley for the last couple of quarters now, right? Everyone is so excited about remote work. And the fact of the matter is we've been forced into remote work for a lot of white collar professionals in the last 6 weeks, right? And a lot of it hasn't been chosen. We've been forced to adapt. If you look at data, you know, we're working now 3 hours more per day than we did going into the office, right? So there's certainly ramifications for that. I get worried about people's wellness in this new remote work model, right? Where we're working more, stress is higher, burnout's gonna, you know, certainly play a factor over time. So those are things to worry about, but not everything's going to remote work. I was talking to a hedge fund buddy of mine over the weekend, and he's like, do you know there's big financial services organizations that are basically asking their employees to come back to work, and asking as a polite way of saying that they're being persuaded to go back into the office, right? So there's steadfast cultures and companies and industries that are resistant to a remote work environment, right? And that's not going to change, right? JP Morgan isn't going to all of a sudden go to a 100% remote work organization when they've got, you know, decades of years of being an office environment, right? He was telling me is for a lot of these traders, when they're sitting in front of three screens, one of them being their Bloomberg terminal, you like that there, Roy, that, you know, it's hard to do in a home office environment. You need to be in an office environment. So I think we're going to see this hybridization that's going to vary by company, vary by culture, vary by industry. And no one's got necessarily the perfect blueprint yet. I think there's going to be a lot of iteration.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if anybody else on this call would defend the it's all going remote point of view. I see very few people calling for that. I think they say there'll be a shift to more of it. I certainly don't subscribe to that point of view, as important as, you know, remote work is as an option or a tool.
Well, remote work's a luxury. A lot of already works, they can go remote.
Well put.
Yeah, I think
well put.
Fortunate enough to be able to go remote, but vast majority of industry are not remote, which is why it's unfair. They still have to go to work, they have to get sick, right? I mean, forget about financial services. Like, look at the people working in factories. They're sitting next to each other making masks right now, and they have no protection, they're gonna get sick. I think that's a population that's gonna hurt the most, versus like, we're very fortunate to be able to do this.
I think that's it's a really important point. And, you know, maybe chapter 2s and 3s of this conversation, I think you divide it up between what's happening in the real world, right? Hourly workers, retail, space workers, the contract with workers. And you can't have any of these conversations without having a perspective on the role government and, you know, civic interaction should have, which there's a whole separate Zoom that we probably shouldn't get into here.
Totally. Well, we can, but yes.
You want to hit universal basic income or ISAs? All the VCs listening in will enjoy that.
I mean, I don't know about ISAs, but I think your point that if I understood your point correctly, that it's not just the integration of work with our home lives, it's the integration of business with all of these broader social policy issues. And, you know, this is a place where, is that what you were getting at actually before I jump in? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I think if you're, you know, a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you're a VC, everything looks like a fundable startup. And most of these things, like, you know, should be projects that we do more broadly with government and nonprofit and civic institutions. And I always say my biggest interest I find I'm doing on the for-profit and nonprofit side, and it's a business model that makes you land with venture or not. So that is, you know, where I was going.
I agree, Kara. I'm on the board of a nonprofit called JBS, and they offer vocational services, upskilling, career pathing, and job placement for folks in middle school jobs across financial services, healthcare, tech, etc. And it used to be a 12-week kind of in-person classroom structure. And people would come in and learn how to be a phlebotomist. They would learn Microsoft Office, and it was very much in person. And talk about a shock to the system and forced kind of now deploying capital in ways. And this is a segment that's going to get left behind because we all have the luxury of working from home. We have a laptop. We have reliable Wi-Fi. They're redeploying capital to give people Chromebooks, to give people money to pay for a Wi-Fi bill. There's this whole sector that, you know, this whole segment of our population that they don't have the same luxuries we have to just kind of flip this switch here. And so I am spending time with nonprofits on how those dollars can be shifted. And it's a whole new muscle and a whole new way of learning.
And I think we're seeing the leverage dangerously shift even further away from many of those groups. Jed Kolko asked a macro question, or Jed Kolko, the Indeed's chief economist, about, you know, we used to have a tight labor market where those people that we're talking about now had the leverage of at least there was a lot of demand for them to work, and that may change. And this is exactly where I think we cannot have a functioning business ecosystem unless we get the right government policies in place to support people. And so, you know, on one level, a lot of those folks are going to have a lot less bargaining power, which is why what may need to happen is what happened in, you know, the Great Depression, which is that they organized. And one of the areas that we've been actively funding is labor organizing tools, because those are also services that don't need to be provided by the government. They can be provided by private corporation, but you need the policies in place so that people's the worst place they can go isn't that bad. Otherwise, they just have no leverage in the system. And so, yeah, that is one of the reasons, Kara, why I think basic income, one of the reasons I like basic income is because I think it's an enabler to participate more fully in the work experience that all of us, try to support.
Yeah, and I think I was kidding, but it's, you know, it's in all seriousness, basic income, income sharing agreements, all of these sort of shared financial burden type instruments that help people, you know, people figure out where and how to invest in building skills for jobs that will exist. And I just think it's a big open question that will never be answered, but what should government pay for? What should employers pay for? And then what should individuals pay for? And we've put far too much of the burden on individuals, but we have, you know, now we're starting to solve it with some experiments around basic income, even from the federal government, right? But we're solving it, you know, in the moment of major crisis, as opposed to, I think all of those things probably go together in a stack where you have, you know, some level of support from our government and from our social welfare state, and then some level of shared risk where you can be trained to be a nurse practitioner or security analyst. I keep coming up with those, but those seem like the areas that, you know, for sure will continue to have job growth.
Well, we're going to need, for example, an army of contact tracers to go out and get trained, because as much as the digital approaches are useful, you know, they're not a complete solution to it. And so I think government is going to come to the table potentially as a direct employer. Let's not forget that the only reason we have this industry in the first place is because the government employed lots of people to do scientific research and invent the internet and all kinds of other stuff on which we now rely.
Yeah. And I think this, what, like we're in a world where there's a much more contact and risk for a certain set of worker, right? The hourly worker. And so figuring out how to protect, pay, train, interview, create cultural norms there is probably a big important area. But then this hybrid world that we're all going into, if you're on the knowledge worker side, that's what's going to be really interesting. Like what happens to the office? What happens to all the vacant workspaces? What happens to childcare when you're at home versus at the office? And there was a question in there, and Lon, you've brought this up, and I think all of us on this call are working parents and it's surprising that we haven't had a kid jump into the Zoom yet. We should go.
I know, we're my favorite coworkers.
I love
know.
my
I got a flat Stanley of one of them right here. I am curious, and Carrie Bennett asked this question earlier. I'm curious how you guys think about, I guess, remote work versus flexible work, and how this is going to help or hurt, you know, kind of the whole movement around creating more representative workforces, right? Like diversity in the workplace. One of the nonprofits that I'm involved with is trying to, Time's Up is seeing a huge spike in domestic abuse, in, workforce issues and childcare issues. And I'm just curious how you guys think about that topic and the topic of flexible work, which is probably would be on the list of things New America is thinking about, Roy. And if you're seeing innovation there, or you're seeing companies that help support it beyond flex.
I think that's such a good question. I think it's very bifurcated. On one hand, I think there's an article came out saying there's just like more gender imbalance than ever, and domestic abuse and depression and all the psychological issues are way up. On the other hand, for other families, both parents are locked at home, so like the parents are forced to actually do more work and become more equal. I haven't seen overall statistics. Like I'm sure, like domestic violence and depression and abuse is up, and I've read data about it. And also, like I think in China, at least, I heard the divorce rate is up like at least 2x, 2.5x. They're a couple of months before us. I think the overall theme is this just force us to revisit what's more important for us. Whether this relationship actually works, force people to look at a more important thing, which is like goes back to the point of like culture and the macro things that's more important. And some family maybe just figure out this is not working anymore. Some family like actually this work, will force us to make choices or decisions we're no longer, we weren't making because we're too busy doing other things. So I think, a lot of most families come back and think about what's actually more health, versus other issues. That's how I think about it. I'm curious about how you guys think about it.
Kara, let me jump in here because one of my good friends, Jeffrey Pfeffer, wrote this amazing book called Dying for a Paycheck. If you haven't read it, go read it. He put it out a while ago. But what he's got a lot of great insights, but one of it is that workforce stress is the 5th leading killer in the United States, right? There's cancer, there's disease, and then there's workforce stress, right? And if you look at everything that's happening, right, you've changed your work environment. Unemployment is skyrocketed. You can't go out and be active in your community. I'm nervous that, stress is now going to go through the roof, and there's a indirect aspect, right? There's certainly, what's happening. I'm sitting outside of New York City, about an hour and a half outside New York City, and even my little community of 12,000 employees or 12,000 residents has gotten hit pretty hard by the virus. But the indirect impact is going to be significantly bigger than the direct impact. And so, to answer your question, job stress right now, to me, I mentioned it earlier, but that to me is probably the biggest concern right now that I'm watching, because it's hard to see and you don't know how to predict it. And it's just going to get worse based off of all the other external factors that companies and individuals have to deal with right now. Roy, go ahead.
You just said it's going to get worse, so I'm stopping you on the prediction part, as much as that feels like safe ground. No, it's all good. I think one of the positive trends in the last few years in the business world generally and the startup world in particular is it's now becoming more okay to talk about these mental health issues. And there are versions that are crippling and you have deaths from despair. And there are versions that are honestly, they're day to day, but just as painful. And, part of me thinks that gets solved through mental health related services. And I'm not a mental health expert other than my own struggles with my own mental health. But part of me also thinks that it's a mentality for how tools get built. That it used to be that tools were built in this utilitarian, functional way, but you see in like the details of Slack, this joyousness that can kind of come through. And, we're investors in a company called Range that is a team productivity tool for working together, but with a tone of caring about how the person is doing. So I don't know, I think that's a change that's happening right now that I would hate to see COVID freeze that change in amber. If anything, like, I don't know if you guys have had this experience where every call you do now starts with like a third of the call is checking in on the other person and really trying to ask how they're doing and caring for them. I think that change, set aside the prediction, Jason, which I happen to agree with, but that change is really positive.
Well, I think as soon as, now that we're all experts in Zoom, right? Zoom went from having 10 million daily actives to over 200 million, right? That's the, the data point we're all talking about. But let's take it a step further, right? I think when you look at having meetings and having interactions in a digital fashion, it's a way for passive data collection. There's all this data that we can collect now from a conversation that we're having, whether it's personal, professional, where you just can get more from the content. There can be different sentiment analysis. There can be understanding of sales objections, of next steps. So from productivity, from just how we connect with each other, I do think it's this data layer that I imagine this whole ecosystem being built around Zoom and these digital interactions that we're all having. And if we view it as an accelerant and something that people build towards, I think there's just a lot of rich data set that we can all use for good.
Yeah,
Delicious gossip question. Would you invest in a Zoom competitor right now?
Would I invest in a Zoom competitor? I think I'm thinking of it differently. It's not Zoom explicitly as the infrastructure, it's just the meeting experience. I'm thinking a lot about pre, during, post meeting experience. And now that all these things are shifting from in-person to online, what can we do with that? So I am looking at the space broadly.
That was like a
hate the stock.
I mean, by the way, that was like a media trained answer. Now I'm going to start harassing you, Naomi. Come on, just say
that means
yes.
you're going to invest in Zoom, Tara, the Zoom competitor.
I'm kidding. By the way, one of the hardest things I find about Zoom versus the audio only, it's much harder to interrupt people. Anyway, it's much harder to like get the staccato flow going, but I sit on a board with Naomi, and she is the best, world-class, amazing. So I'm going to give her an advertisement now, given I just was harassing her. I feel comfortable harassing her. Anyway, I was going to say, I think this kind of Me Too stuff with Zoom doesn't make sense to me, but I do think what's interesting is like every single day I ask a question that I still haven't answered for myself, which is, does Zoom have an API? And here are like the 10 things I would want to build around it. Like one of them is just like making it easy to interrupt people and jump together and like use it for collaboration. Like even if you look at this panel, so my friend Stacey Breen, I mentioned before, was on this call, and I won't share all of her personal details, though she'd probably be fine with it. But she's a doctor in Boston, a friend of mine from college I hadn't connected with in a long time. And every week now, my college friends do a Zoom call. And she's been like in the trenches helping people with COVID, like deeply helping people with COVID, knows more about it than any of the fancy doctors in my community, and anyone I know as COVID, I've been sending to her, and she's been doing it just as a friend and a nice person. And she's like iterating on ideas in the Q&A right now around remote testing systems and collaborations between mental health, a testing van. And if you think about it, like there is no direct to consumer trustworthy testing system right now, and the false positives and all the confusion and concern we have around that. Everybody thinks they have antibodies, but there are thousands of coronaviruses, or at least many of them, and no one really knows. If you could just figure out how to do like the +1 on Zoom plus collaboration and getting people from different industries together, like brainstorming sessions, better forms of having cocktails with people, because it sucks for cocktails. Zoom cocktails are totally unfulfilling. I feel like there's kind of like a whole host of very specific use cases where Zoom is showing us potential and not fulfilling it every hour of the day, from like things that sound super frivolous to actually figuring out how to get mass testing out there. Soliloquy
telemedicine. I am loving just being able to video chat with my doctor versus schlepping to the office.
Telemedicine, that's one area I think is going to be an ultimate winner out of the last month and a half, right? I mean, I sit here in Connecticut.
No more predictions. Stop.
All right.
You can share an observation about something that's working.
So here's my observation, right? Telemedicine is an industry that's been around for a very, very long time and struggled to get adoption, right? We've been, another one of these things, we've been forced to adoption in the last 6 weeks. one of the barriers with telemedicine was, here in Connecticut, it's big in biotech and medical, was if you're doing it, you want to call your doctor, right? You don't want to just call some random doctor. You want your doctor. Fact of the matter is now we've been forced to go to a doctor to see things that our traditional doctor just doesn't have the time, energy, or availability to do. And people love it. Like you said, people now, they're like, I've never tried this before because when I have an issue, I want to talk to my doctor. You've tried it, you love it. This is going to be, a really interesting shift that we're going to see as a direct beneficiary of what's happened in the last few weeks. No predictions.
I mean, there's a ton of data from, again, other countries being ahead of us for a month. You look at their data, telemedicine's like way up 9x, and like short form video content, entertainment, gaming. I think, some of the like chip makers will have way higher volume because people play more games than ever. I think that's one trend we're forced to go into one direction. On the other, I'm so sick of like just sitting in front of a computer every day. I'm just like, I can't wait to just not do this anymore. As soon as we get ready, I think there's a question from someone, like actually this push us to the opposite direction. We might want more nature. We just want to get out and more people interaction. We're all
back to basics.
Yeah, we're all future working investors. Initially, my thesis is like, oh, let's get everything more efficient, just like more efficient, better, faster. But then there are certain industries, very interestingly, they're getting slower and slower, like winemaking, right? The productivity of the vertical just completely stopped, and people enjoy being slow and not productive. I think we're probably seeing like, it's so interesting to observe both trends happening.
Roy, I'm curious, I take either one, if you're spending more time thinking either about getting back to the basics or mental health or some more of kind of the adjacent areas, and then on the other side of it, if you're thinking more about what you're specifically looking at funding or supporting around hourly workers and frontline workers.
Yeah, so I always struggle. So look, we've been future of work since day one of our fund, and our thesis then, I struggle with thesis-based investing, despite arguably having a thesis-based fund, because our thesis was as straightforward as our personal lives have been improved a lot by technology. Our work lives barely have. That should change. And so it was fairly general, and the big surprise was AI arising, which I initially resisted and was totally wrong about. And so I'm in much the same place now, which is I kind of feel like I follow what founders are thinking to do. And I'm sure you guys have seen this, where you get this weird effect of like a cluster of 6 companies all at the same time that are working on the same problem, because it's just sort of in the air. And so to me, one of the most exciting things about this moment is that I think that the life experience that founders are being forced to go through is going to change their perspective on what to build, change their perspective because they're home, maybe with their families, change their perspective because people they love try easy to use tools and struggle with them despite how quote unquote easy they are, change their perspective because they know somebody who got sick or struggled with depression or something. And it's that life experience, like one of the reasons I care so much about diversity among founders is you need life experience as the soil of invention. And so think about how much, like, I worked in city government just after 9/11, and it permanently shaped my view on how the world works. And so I guess I don't have a great answer to your question, Kara, because I don't really think that way. But I am really excited to see how the changed life experience of founders makes them work on more services, just like what you described.
Yeah, I love that. Naomi, Lon, Jason, I'm curious, for those of you who hunt around theses, whether or not you fund around theses, but hunt around theses, if you're doing anything in either of those pockets. I can always talk more.
Lonnie on mute.
Sorry. It happens like 10 times a day. So we're pretty heavily invested in spaces like hourly workers and anything beyond office. I was talking about, we have a company called Workstream that solves specifically the problem of high turnover rate of certain space, restaurant workers, truck drivers, etc. Now with COVID going on, lots of hospitals need to hire a lot of people, and the turnover rate is pretty high. So that's one of the companies that does that. We're also like very heavily does like, supply chain logistics, construction, real estate, agriculture, and factory automation. So a lot of the portfolio companies in solving those problems.
Yeah, Kara, I'll try to be quick here. I've looked at a lot of the kind of gig marketplaces and I've strayed away from those. So fascinated, but for me, they just haven't been investable for lots of reasons I won't bore you guys with. The one area I am fascinated with right now, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, is apprenticeships, right? I just think there's going to be such an interesting opportunity in apprenticeship. I live here in a state that we are losing jobs at mass scale. And that's not because there aren't big companies that aren't hiring, right? We have Electric Boat here that builds submarines here in Connecticut, and they can't find workers fast enough because it's a highly specialized skill. It's a well-paying job, but they can't find people to fill those, right? They need to build out this apprenticeship program. And that's just one simple example. I think that's going to be a fascinating area that I've been spending some time in, that, when I think about the different kind of dynamics or different types of workers, that's one I'm fascinated with.
Naomi, do you have anything on this topic? Because like when you ask someone their favorite ice cream, I'm hoping someone will ask it to me back.
You can volunteer an answer to your own questions here. This is a no moderators panel,
Let's hear it, Kara.
No, I kind of want to hear from Naomi first. It gives me more time to search for that DocSend deck.
So I know I'm the workflow and productivity nerd of the group. However, I have been looking at this definition more broadly. When I think of kind of gig workers and freelance segment, I think about what are the other things that they need to even have, again, the luxury to focus on work. And so one investment I made there is in a healthcare company called Decent, and they offer affordable healthcare for the self-employed. And there's just trillions of dollars at stake here, and a lot of it's bloat in the system from misaligned incentives. And so they've created these low-cost plans that give people a chance to actually be freelancers and not have their health insurance tied to an employer and have more flexibility. And what is this new world that we're all still kind of figuring out day by day? But leaning on, virtual healthcare and other ways to like strip out the savings and pass it on to the consumers.
One of the things that I think, Jason, you raised that I don't know that I think is at stake right now is apprenticeship is the way most of us learned how to do most of what we did, whether or not we had an apprenticeship. And, we're still hiring summer interns this summer. They're going to be remote. And, am I confident I can offer them the same kind of learning opportunity? It'll be different. I'm not actually confident in it. And I think that is getting repeated writ large across the whole economy, which is like a lot of the ways we've just been grown up as professionals to learn things. I don't know how we do now. I think that's one of the big questions that's at stake. I just want one housekeeping thing, which is we're going to keep going for about 5 more minutes. There is no chance will we get through the 45 open questions in the queue, let alone the 29 that have been somehow answered or dismissed because they got answered. And so I think there's room for another one of these for sure. But just, I just wanted to say we've just got a few more minutes here for parting thoughts and such.
So Roy, there's one last question that we haven't touched on that I'm completely fascinated. So I'm curious to get your perspective, which is this whole, and I put it in some of our conversations around this concept of stakeholder capitalism, right? You can't turn on the TV right now without seeing some commercial about XYZ company cares, right? Or they're donating to some philanthropic organization. I know all of you care in different types of local, state, national charities. My question is this going to be something that is infused into companies ongoing, or is this just a moment in time, right? I saw this great thing on Twitter the other day, which was like, I get an email every other day from United Airlines right now about how much they care, but they certainly didn't care when my bag weighed 52 pounds, right? So, but I guess my bigger question is do you think we're going to see a broader shift in philanthropy that's embraced into an organization's business model? Or do you think it's just going to be, we care, business world goes back to normal, and those things are less relevant going forward?
This is 1,000 topics, and so I'll just try to say 2 sentences on it because I've thought about it a ton. I mean, one of the things we try to spend a lot of time doing is working at the intersection of power in government and philanthropy. I just joined the board of Stanford's Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society to try to understand this better. And if folks are curious, you can hit me up on Twitter. We have a crowdsourced list of organizations to which to give. Let's separate out a few things. One is marketing from reality. There's a lot of bullshit marketing right now. And it's been amazing to me how the thank you retail heroes stuff, when it's in the voice of the worker and they have power over their own story, that's one thing. But it's like, if I was working at one of these companies that ran a thank you ad for me about how much they care, I'd be like, just fucking pay me more. Like, instead of running that ad. And so I think there's that. And then in the reality, I would follow the money. Because I think that, or the actions that organizations take, it's one thing to say you're like a big deal. It's another thing, in your good and giving. It's not obvious to me that companies that say they do stakeholder capitalism are any more ethical or giving than companies that are just plain capitalists. I think it's really about the choices that they make as opposed to the marketing. And, one of the reasons I'm proud that the returns of our fund go to Bloomberg is because it goes to Bloomberg Philanthropies and fights climate change and guns and all this stuff. But, so I guess I'd just say, I think there's a lot of noise around marketing and it takes a discerning eye to separate real actions from nonsense.
I'll jump in too. I'll say yes. I'll start with yes. And I think it goes back to something where I said before, which I actually wrote down. The life experiences we're all having right now will change our perspective on what to build. And I think that you will, I think that is true for what you build and what will be funded. I hope it will be. I think the question is, we as venture capitalists get the opportunity to give money to people who want to solve problems, and all of the job growth, as we know, all the companies that now go public are venture backed. They're largely venture backed by men. They're largely venture backed by white, Indian, and Asian men. When they are backed by women, they tend to be backed by women, a certain kind of woman as well.
Let's not forget balding.
Balding, yes. Okay. And so it's awesome that we have more people right now obsessed with the future of work and hourly workers and, education benefits and reskilling through the workplace and mental health. And we just I think we just all getting more and more people, we'll break it down. Hopefully in 5 years, we won't be doing anything on the future of work. We'll just have the little slivers and that term will go away. But the problems that we all choose to fund and the problems that founders choose to build around will change everything, hopefully. And hopefully we're doing less of the stuff that is only seen in certain cities, and it really is the rise of the rest. And I think the one thing that may change for venture capital, to the extent we get a choice as to what to fund, is a greater comfort with doing Zoom board meetings. And that may sound ridiculous, but it does have a big impact, particularly if you take board seats for every investment you make, as to whether or not you pick up a new city. And so, I spoke to a founder today that I did not fund because he had an all remote company. And I have funded all remote companies, but it was all remote in every sort of way and based in Europe. And maybe I will, maybe that will change, and maybe more funds like all of our funds and all the funds that take board seats, and we'll make sure these companies get funded, and we'll hopefully try to get them to solve big problems and hire diverse teams. We'll be doing it in a different way where you don't have to just be along the 101. And that goes all the way down to LA. So I can say the 101. But the specifics of it, who knows? So that's my answer. We all have to fund different things in different ways, and hopefully fund people who want to solve these kinds of problems.
And maybe Naomi and Lon, your perspectives on this before we wrap. And Jason, of course, you get to answer your own question if you want to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of marketing. I think actually there's some data showing philanthropy actually is down, given people just have less money.
Wow. Wow.
At the same time, a lot of really, really ultra rich people are actually stepping up. Bill Gates, for example, stepping up and do more. I think, again, we'll see kind of bifurcation of this. And I agree with both of you, there's a lot of noise. Marketing, actually CAC is way down. Doing marketing now is cheaper than ever. So this is a message people will probably want to hear about. And therefore, from ROI point of view, it's up. But I do want to go back to a point that Kara touched on earlier, which is the investment in the next 12 to 18 months as an investor. There's, I think, the one final question on the top of the list is what does investing look like in the next 12 to 18 months? I mean, I think it's going to be very tough. I think LP will deploy slowly. I think investor will deploy slowly, especially not being able to meet in person. Overall, on average, deployment and investing there's just going to be more scrutiny, and valuation will be down. Is that a prediction? I'm already seeing that happening. At the same time, there are like funds, certain funds will be deployed faster. There will be like more active investors, and we've been actually kind of slow last year. So this year we're actually picking up our pace, given the valuation is a lot more reasonable, and we're able to do a little bit more diligence on company. I'm curious about what you guys are seeing.
Yeah, and I think the notion of kind of, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Naomi, please.
I think the notion of kind of what is a seed round, what is an A, what is a B, sort of typical size of rounds, like these are all going to change. I'm just seeing a big trend around these sort of top off rounds of people saying, I just want to get that kind of smaller kind of mezzanine amount of dollars in to just kind of get past this and get to the other side. And so I think the typical kind of cycles that we see, the typical ways that we invest, the typical, where we like to play at different stages is all getting murky. So that's another piece that I would add to what Lan said. But in general, I'm just I'm just long on this shock to the system that we've all had from a willingness to adopt new technologies. I think inertia is a really powerful thing, and people are just doing their job the same way all the time. And now people were forced into this whole new world of adopting technology, and what that's done to nonprofits that I work with, what it's done to my daughter's Montessori school. They're anti-screen time, anti-technology in every way, shape, or form, and now they're doing 3 hours of lessons online every day. And so this is just new muscle that people are building across every sector, across every demo, and I'm just excited to see what people do with it. I know we feel sick of it, and kind of like there's a Zoom fatigue that's very real, but I'm very long on what this trend's going to do for the way people work.
I'll just layer in one last comment here, Roy, maybe to answer my own question. I'm an eternal optimist, right? So I think that this is an amazing opportunity to rethink your business, right? To rethink how you treat your workers, to rethink how you infuse different types of philanthropic efforts into your business, right? You have a window of opportunity to hit this reset button, so why not use it? And I hope companies do use it. I hope we don't go back into some of the old ways of things that just didn't work historically. But who knows, right? I wish we all had a crystal ball. But we do have an interesting opportunity to rewrite the future with our workforce. So why not use it?
Beautifully put. The history, I've been trying to read more history of the past pandemics, and the history is that people make big pronouncements about it'll never be like this again. We'll never go to CES and wait in a sweaty line with lots of people. And then eventually things do go back. But I think, Jason, to your point, and I think it's come up across all of our comments, we have a lot of choice here. We have a lot of choice about what we fund. Founders have a lot of choice about what they build. We have choice about what to ask our elected officials for, and being conscious of what's at stake so we can make those choices for the better and drop the old stuff that didn't work feels like the challenge. Well, I, for one, would be up for doing something like this again, because that was a ton of fun. And the conversation will continue. I think we have all our Twitter handles here, so you can find us elsewhere. And I'm really grateful for all the different perspectives, because despite the fact that everybody is now a future of work expert, I still feel more like a student than anything else. And so it's just great to hear all of your points of view. Kara, anything you want to say before we wrap?
Oh, Roy, thanks for being an inspiration to this whole area. You guys kind of created the term in a lot of ways. Thanks for going and eating lunch with me on Acadian in New York City 15 years ago when
I know.
When you had more hair and my hair was my original color. And it was awesome to do this all together, and hopefully we can do more. So thank you for gathering.
Yeah,
us.
my kids will point out that it is generous that I called myself balding, because it implies that there may not be more to the, I think we've hit the end of the road on that one, guys. And yeah, okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening in. Incredible to have as many attendees as we did. We're gonna close the webinar out right now, and you may see some write-ups of this come out. And we just love to keep the conversation going and the questions flowing. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Roy.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.